Right now, you're probably watching this on a smartphone. Maybe it's an iPhone, maybe a Galaxy. But have you ever wondered what makes people pick one side over the other? Behind the sleek screens and billion-dollar ad campaigns, two giants, Apple and Samsung, have been waging a Cold War for over a decade. It's a war fought not with weapons, but with design, innovation, lawsuits, and marketing jabs. One started in a California garage, the other in post-war Korea. Today, they dominate the tech world. This isn't just about phones, it's about influence, culture, and control of the digital future. In 1976, two young men, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, launched Apple from a California garage. Their mission? To make computers personal, sleek, and intuitive. Apple quickly became known for its innovation-first mindset and beautifully designed hardware. In 1984, the Macintosh introduced a whole new way to interact with computers. A decade later, Apple struggled, until Jobs returned in the late 90s and kick-started a golden era of design with the iMac, iPod, and eventually, the iPhone. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Samsung had been growing steadily for decades. Founded in South Korea in 1938, it started as a grocery trading company. But by the 1970s and 80s, Samsung was heavily investing in electronics, semiconductors, and appliances. By the early 2000s, Samsung was a tech powerhouse, producing memory chips, displays, and components used by companies all over the world. One of those companies? Apple. Ironically, Samsung played a key role in Apple's rise. It supplied Apple with essential parts for the iPhone: flash memory, processors, and display panels. For a time, they were business partners, quietly powering the same devices they would one day battle. But that partnership wouldn't last. Would you like me to continue with part 3, the iPhone revolution? January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs takes the stage at Macworld and makes an announcement that would shake the entire tech world. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator, these are not three separate devices. The iPhone was sleek, it was touchscreen, it was revolutionary, and it instantly made every other phone look outdated. No keyboard, just glass, a full web browser, and a new way to interact with technology through gestures. It wasn't just a new phone, it was the beginning of the smartphone era. Samsung had been making phones for years, but none of them looked or worked like the iPhone. Behind the scenes, Samsung engineers studied the iPhone closely, very closely. Around the same time, Google was preparing to launch Android, a new mobile operating system. Samsung jumped on board, becoming one of Android's earliest and most aggressive hardware partners. In 2009, Samsung released the first Galaxy phone. A year later, the Galaxy S. It had a familiar shape, a large touchscreen, and a grid of colorful app icons. Sound familiar? Apple noticed, and they weren't happy. What followed was one of the biggest legal fights in tech history. Apple accused Samsung of copying the iPhone's design, interface, and even packaging. The battle lines were drawn, and the smartphone war had officially begun. In 2011, Apple made its move. It sued Samsung for patent infringement, accusing the company of copying the iPhone's design. The lawsuits were about more than just phones. They were about control, about setting the rules of the game. Apple's legal team argued that Samsung had copied everything, from the physical design of the iPhone to the layout of the apps on screen. Apple demanded $1 billion in damages, claiming Samsung was stealing its ideas. Samsung fired back, claiming that Apple's design patents were invalid and that they were merely following industry trends. They argued that innovation wasn't exclusive to Apple, and that Samsung was merely competing in a rapidly evolving market. The courts were divided, and the battle stretched on for years across multiple countries and courtrooms. In the US, Apple won the first round, with a court awarding $1 billion in damages, but this was just the start of a 7-year legal battle filled with appeals, retrials, and counterclaims. Meanwhile, Samsung kept moving forward. It didn't just defend itself in court, it started pushing boundaries with its own designs. The Galaxy Note, introduced in 2011, had a much larger screen than the iPhone, and the addition of the S Pen stylus set it apart from Apple's touch-only approach. Samsung wasn't just copying, It was innovating too. The Galaxy Note was a sign of things to come. Curved displays, water resistance, and a variety of hardware features Apple wasn't willing to explore. While the courts battled, Apple's design philosophy remained focused on refinement and minimalism, perfecting what was already there. Samsung, on the other hand, began to experiment more boldly, pushing boundaries with larger displays, curve, edges, and multitasking features. Each company, though different in approach, was setting the stage for the next big innovation. They weren't just competing, they were defining the future of smartphones. While the legal battle raged on, a new front opened: innovation. Apple took its signature approach, refined, perfect, and built an ecosystem. Every device was part of a seamless web. Your iPhone synced with your Mac, your iPad, your Apple Watch, AirDrop, iMessage, FaceTime. It all just worked. Instead of flooding the market, Apple released just one iPhone per year, but each version came with polish, faster chips, better cameras, smoother software. Samsung took a different route: fast-paced innovation with bold ideas, bigger screens, removable batteries, curved edges, AMOLED displays. If Apple was cautious, Samsung was fearless. Samsung pioneered features like water resistance, fast charging, multi-window multitasking, even the first modern foldable phones. Not everything stuck, but they were always pushing the envelope. Apple introduced Face ID and focused on privacy. Samsung responded with iris scanners, fingerprint readers under the screen, and even desktop experiences like Samsung DeX. The two brands became benchmarks for each other. Every Apple launch was compared to Samsung's latest, and vice versa. And whether fans admitted it or not, each company often adopted the other's innovations. Years later, in their own way, Apple eventually adopted OLED displays, made by Samsung. Samsung, meanwhile, worked hard to improve its software polish and updates, areas where Apple had long held the edge. This wasn't just a rivalry anymore. It was a tech arms race. And the winner? Arguably, the consumer. Apple's marketing has always been simple, clean, emotional. It didn't just sell a product, it sold a feeling, a lifestyle: cool, premium, effortless. From think different to shot on iPhone, Apple turned its devices into status symbols. Owning an iPhone became a statement about taste, identity, even class. Samsung, on the other hand, took a more aggressive approach. Its ads didn't just highlight features, they mocked Apple directly. "You're waiting in line to..." again, became one of Samsung's most iconic jabs. It painted iPhone users as blind followers and Galaxy owners as the smarter, more practical choice. For years, Samsung leaned into what Apple lacked: headphone jacks, fast charging, styluses, and massive displays. It won users by offering more, often earlier. But the rivalry also had its irony. Samsung would mock Apple's choices and then follow them a year or two later. Both brands started resembling each other more and more. Samsung polished its image. Apple expanded its features. And the fan bases? They only grew more passionate and more divided. What began as a corporate competition evolved into a cultural one. Apple users were seen as loyalists, Samsung users as rebels, and everyone had an opinion. This wasn't just about phones anymore. It was about identity, and both brands knew exactly how to sell it. As the smartphone war intensified, Apple and Samsung began fighting on a much larger battlefield: the world. Apple dominated in wealthier markets: North America, Europe, Japan. Its premium pricing didn't stop millions from upgrading year after year. In some countries, owning an iPhone was a status symbol. Samsung, meanwhile, played both ends. Flagship phones competed with the iPhone, but Samsung also flooded emerging markets with mid-range and budget devices, especially across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. By 2012, Samsung overtook Apple in global smartphone sales, and for most of the next decade, it stayed on top. But while Samsung shipped more units, Apple made more money, thanks to higher margins and customer loyalty. The numbers told a fascinating story. Samsung won in volume. Apple won in value. Samsung innovated fast. Apple made it polished. One company made parts for everyone, including their biggest rival. The other built an empire off premium simplicity. Together, they shaped not just the smartphone market, but how the world connects, learns, and lives. By 2017, the smartphone battle had entered a new phase. Apple unveiled the iPhone X, a radical redesign celebrating the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. The iPhone X introduced an edge-to-edge OLED screen, facial recognition technology, and the controversial notch. It was a bold move that set new industry standards. Samsung responded quickly with its own innovation. The Infinity Display, a curved, nearly bezel-less screen that pushed the boundaries of design. This marked a turning point. Apple was no longer just setting trends. Samsung was matching and sometimes surpassing Apple's innovation while still maintaining its diverse lineup. Samsung then broke new ground with foldable smartphones, a concept Apple hasn't yet embraced. Meanwhile, Apple focused on perfecting user experience and ecosystem integration. But by this time, the market was changing. Smartphone sales growth was slowing worldwide. Consumers held onto phones longer, and innovation faced limits. The question now, how do these giants stay relevant in a world where everyone already has a smartphone? Looking ahead, the Apple versus Samsung rivalry is far from over. Both companies are investing heavily in new technologies that could redefine how we live and work. Apple is expanding beyond phones with a Vision Pro mixed reality headset and rumors of an Apple car. Its focus remains on seamless integration and user privacy. Samsung, meanwhile, continues to innovate with foldable devices, smart home ecosystems, and advancements in 5G and artificial intelligence. The rivalry is evolving from phones to entire ecosystems, wearables, health tech, augmented reality, and beyond. For consumers, this means more choice and smarter tech. But for Apple and Samsung, the battle for innovation, market share, and cultural influence will continue to shape the future. Two giants, one relentless competition, and a technology landscape forever changed. From garages and factories to millions of pockets worldwide, the story of Apple and Samsung is more than just a rivalry. It's a saga of innovation, ambition, and culture. They've pushed each other to new heights, transforming not only technology, but how we connect, create, and communicate. Whether you're Team Apple or Team Samsung, one thing is clear. Without their fierce competition, the smartphone world would look very different today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Apple vs. Samsung saga, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more tech stories. What's your take on the rivalry? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.